Hi, so this is about our rubric number 1, user experience design, about the second piece of it, which is back-end database design. We are dealing with a NoSQL database here, which is a MongoDB. By default, it is not relational in nature, so there is not much of structure that is possible here. It is a database which is pretty flexible. It can take in columns, values as object value pairs directly, even without you having to configure anything. So right now it is actually after the post installation, you use it through a command prompt because I'm using the local database here. So let me show you how it is structured. So pardon me if I'm scrolling through the list of commands because I would have had to type it in anyway. So right now what happens here is when I click on show collections, it's going to show up all the list of database tables or collections. Collections is equivalent to tables for us here that I have right now. This is for the main node, which is called AppRaise, which is for the application that I've created. If I were to see this from the perspective of the code or the Angular or the Node.js code that I have written here, I would be configuring this based on models. So for example, this is a model for an application profile, which is an application detail. You can see application ID, you can see app name, app category, app owner, and app status. Now I could add in more as I insert data. It is completely acceptable here, but what happens is that we need to make sure what the impacts are before we do it. I'll explain a little bit more once we have seen a few more steps here. Now what I'm doing here is I'm using a connector called as Mongoose. This is the name that I just read out. Mongoose is the connector here. I have included it here to communicate between Mongo database and the Node.js, as well as the Express and Angular in my front end. So I pull in data with a simple command here. I'm actually looking at a mongoose.model. I'm looking at a very specific database collection name, which is app profile. This is the schema, a rough schema that I've set. I am expecting these values. This is the object value pair that I'm expecting. So I've kind of drawn it up here. And this is the actual name of the schema that I'm going to pass on to my services. I will get to that in a few seconds. But before we actually go into that, I just want you to have a look at what I have currently in my application profile collection or table, as I call it. So there is a simple command for that. What I do is db.appprofile find.pretty. Pretty is just going to give me a clean look of the form, of the data in the collection. So I have lots of it, but everything is structured in exactly the same way. The ID is the object ID, which I can use eventually to update things. App name, app ID, app category, app status, app owner. These are very identical to the format that I've used here. That's happening because I'm adding data continuously through the forms, and the forms are following this format. So that's where the schema comes in. This is where the design comes in. I have a schema for every component that I have explained. Survey has its own schema, and it goes into a separate table of its own, which is called app survey details. So if I were to go in and look at the collection and the data there, I would get similar data with object value pairs there. So this is how I control what I'm adding in. Mongo database is extremely flexible. I can choose to add in more object value pairs, but this kind of makes it structured, adds a little bit of structure to the chaos. If not, I would be randomly adding in things and it would be getting stored in any which way, which might not be very helpful when you look at trying to structure your database or create a website on it. So to an extent it is structured, and it also allows me to be flexible. Now when I try to add in something new, something apart from this, say for instance I wanted to add in a new object value pair called app name or something right here in this. This is the status profile schema. So I'm adding in a new status here, and all I need from you is a status name, a new status name that you have in mind. Maybe tomorrow you decide you want to also add in a status rating or something like that. You can go ahead, store it there. You can continue to send information, and I can still store it in the status profile collection. Not a problem at all. But we need to make sure that we know the impact. We should make sure that when we are editing a particular status, we should be aware that we should also add in now the status rating, or if we want to update anything existing with a new status rating, we should make sure we are not disturbing the status name, so, or the app status that you've already provided. So these are a few things that we need to take care of when we are trying to make updates by adding in new fields right in the middle of the functioning of the website. Because you suddenly had a requirement, you decided to add something new, you might require to do a little bit of impact analysis. But otherwise, the MongoDB is fantastic and it's very flexible. The second piece which I mentioned in the rubric is the REST API code and how it is mapped to this structure and how it is mapped to the non-relational database in general. There are two pieces to this. The first one is the piece where you actually design the API. So the API has a lot of services. Services are nothing but functions. So let me just open one of the service app profile services that I've created. So this is for specific to applications. What all can I do with application data? I can add, I can delete, I can update, I can add categories, I can do a lot. I can basically do all these functionalities to each of the collection components that I've stored. I can change status, I can change category, I can add questions. I have now collected all of that functionality into one service. They are all together listed here. To talk to this service, I will need to trigger this using a URL. And here in the routing file, I specify that URL. So it's very clearly helping me understand. For example, let me just pick one random one. For example, this update one. It's pretty simple. What I'm doing is I'm going to update an application and I have an ID, the object ID tagged to the very end. So the moment I look at a URL, if I were to go back to my site and edit this particular if I were to edit this any application, if you were to notice the URL, it is just going to, let me open an application and try to edit, or maybe edit a survey. Okay, I need to edit a survey here because I'm logged in as a manager. So give me 1 second. Sorry for jumping around. There you go. So now I'm just editing the survey. If you were to look at the URL, you are now editing a survey, app survey edit, and you have a long ID tagged towards the very end. This is actually defined in the routing file, except that this ID is mentioned as a variable with an ID there so that you can access it. So if I were to scroll down and find the app survey edit function, here it is. This is the exact URL. When I click on this, this functionality gets triggered. This is talking to the services file, finding the update mechanism for the surveys, and then completing the process for it. So this is like a 3-phase setup, and that is how the mapping is done using the URL. So these are good examples of how the URL is mapped to the service, and the whole thing comes together using the object. So in the service, if I were to pick the service and go into the app survey method, you would see that I'm actually passing an object here. So this URI is actually the object that I'm passing. The app profile is the object that I'm passing here. And the object behaves like the model that I have set. So the model is basically for an app profile, it would be app name, app category, app status. So all of this comes together in one place and they talk to each other and complete the task. On the form itself, I'm just able to see a simple message which says your save has been performed. So this is how the basic structure has been set up using the mean stack. So all